This set was actually fairly large, but could never be large enough. And like a number of our sets, was built around the idea of a green screen stage, so that whenever we shoot off in certain directions, we would extend. And so Sony Imageworks generated the backgrounds here to extend the castle in pretty much all directions except length.
This set used just about every available piece of area on that. It wasn't a formal soundstage, it was actually an old warehouse, and we had the set pushed all the way to the wall.
This is where we see a combination of CG and real wolves. The other thing that was kind of interesting is the wolves were fantastic. They're actually wolf hybrids and they're wonderful looking, but you notice several times when you see them, they were quite happy to be let out and run around, to get a chance to run around. So very often we couldn't use shots because they were running along with big smiles and wagging tails, and we wanted them to look like killers. So we actually in some cases went in and digitally removed their tails and put less happy tails on them. That's a cut there directly from a real wolf looking at the house to turning around and being a CG wolf. It says take them, and then a bunch of real wolves running in.
I think it really is remarkable when the two are so seamlessly presented side by side.
It's a CG wolf looking through the window and a couple of real wolves with CG tails.
And these are real wolves trying to get at food.
Yes, in some cases that's obviously a real followed by a CG wolf. A lot of this was shot by our second unit. Obviously, this movie had some of those things they tell you not to do, as children, animals, visual effects, locations, weather. And fortunately, we had a great second unit who shot a lot of our wolf footage, because it's a more time-consuming thing to shoot with such unpredictable animals.
Yes, it was such a thing that the first unit would shoot on this set, for instance, during the day, and then we would wrap at 7 or 8 in the afternoon and the evening, and second unit would take over and shoot the exact same set, but with the painstaking stuff of getting the wolves to do it just right.
It's always a challenging thing as a director to be able to sort of hand stuff off, and you have to have a real, I think, trust in your second unit. I really learnt to rely on them, and they ended up providing me with such sort of wonderful opportunities that I never would have had time to get.
Sorry, dear.
He was my best mate.
And this set, this whole town here was built actually in an airplane hangar.
That's right, it was. Not a very big one either.
This is what becomes of those who cross the witch.
This moment actually came out of a small moment in the book, which was when the White Witch comes upon a fox and some squirrels having a picnic celebrating Christmas. And it stemmed from the idea of wanting to develop Fox as a more integral character and set up this idea of Narnia almost kind of having an underground, an allied resistance. And largely because I wanted the impact of her turning the fox to stone to have more emotional impact by getting to know him, and then that went into, well, what if he actually helped and saved the kids? And then the scene ended up kind of growing around that, and it has now become such a vital scene in both achieving that goal and also establishing a sense of responsibility in the kids, that when they see what lengths people are willing to go through in order to protect them because they care so much about Narnia, then the kids start to feel more responsible for Narnia themselves.
I think it's such an inspired, realistic touch that several times when running, the wolves actually, their hindquarters slip out from under them.
Great animation.
North. They ran north.
Smell them out.
This was a very difficult scene to shoot. This also was a lot of second unit work, but difficult to shoot because most of this scene down below is just backgrounds. There were no characters there to be shot. So all the camera movement, all of that had to be mapped out ahead of time by our previous supervisor, Rapin, who actually was very present for a lot of that shooting, because we had to obviously put the characters in after the camera moves had been done, which is kind of challenging.
This is also one of those scenes that I wasn't sure of, and when we all, and perhaps even I more than anyone, we were under the sort of the budget hammer. I thought, well, do we really need this, and can we get around it quicker, and do we need to, you know, is it need to be as complete as it is? And while Andrew justified it repeatedly to me, it wasn't until I saw it almost fully animated when I realized how successfully it would work.
And the other interesting thing about the scene, of course, is that the scene we're watching is not the one we shot, because we repurposed it after the fact. So you may have been right that the scene as written wasn't necessary, but it became necessary later on. We ended up, you know, one of the great things about having CG characters in your film is you can change the dialogue later on. And while we were able to keep the children's side of that scene, we completely repurposed it and made it more about Aslan, because we found after a test screening that it was essential to have more sense of him early on.
And that's right. We have that moment he says, "You've seen Aslan. What was he like?"
Yeah, that was all added within a few months of finishing the film. This is a scene actually that came about through one of your early ideas, which is that just Mr. Tumnus is such a memorable character from the book, and we should keep him more alive and keep him more present. And when working with Chris and Steve, the other writers, they came up with this idea of keeping him alive and in the prison and helping him to sort of add even more guilt to Edmund, by Edmund actually seeing the direct consequences of what he'd done.
That's true. I remember very early on wanting to see more of Mr. Tumnus, and that he was such an important character to Lucy, and he really was our entrance into Narnia. I thought it was a real loss when he didn't really have a significant role after the introduction.
And strangely enough, this was the set that Don found the most difficult to light. It was quite limited in its size and quite complex in the way it was all made out of, you know, semi-transparent resins. We wanted to create this refractive look, and I don't think I'd ever seen him sort of...
The first time, actually, wasn't it?
It was.
That we had this so-called ice, and I remember looking at the very first pictures in the morning thinking, oh, is it going to work? And for a moment thinking it wasn't going to work, but Don worked so hard to light it, and then we had the problem with the doorway, and this was the first time, you know, with the White Witch's dress and the width of it at the bottom, and Tilda being the amazing trooper that she is, you know, rather than sort of saying, I can't get through the doorway, managed to come in sideways somehow or other, so that the dress, which was actually...
She injured herself coming through that doorway a couple of times and just kept going. We were very lucky how stoic she was with the whole thing.
Do you know, I remember, speaking of lighting this, that Donna ended up using commercial fluorescent lights with blue gel, stacks of them. But I remember we shot this, I think, on a Monday or Tuesday, and I was talking to one of our construction men who told me that Don McAlpine, our cameraman, had come in over the weekend and had spent the entire day just trying to figure out how to light it, and you know, was really concerned and didn't have the answers. And I thought, isn't it amazing, somebody with the career that Don's had and done as much as he has, that he still has these dilemmas that, quite frankly, doesn't immediately know how to solve.
I was very proud of the fact that I had the biggest set he'd ever lit in in Lantern Waste, where Lucy first comes into the wardrobe, and this, he said, was the most difficult set he ever lit. So yes, over a 50-odd year career, I was very proud of those. But you know, he actually, again, it's a tribute to how just progressive he is. He developed this whole thing with a digital stills camera that was completely calibrated to a film look, so that he could actually photograph and show on a computer scene in a calibrated way. He could show me exactly what a set would look like on film, and it was necessary in a case like this, because we were having to sort of design the lighting to the camera, and it was really a great tool that he could actually reassure me by showing me how it was going to look. This shot coming up is of a location that we found in the Czech Republic, is actually what enticed me over there in the first place. It's not a national monument or anything, it's just an incredible location that we came upon, and it just was so grand and otherworldly that it sent me over in that direction.
It to be small. Smaller.
The scene was this first scene that we really started to see Narnia opening up. It was part of that design process we talked about early on, that it would narrow down through the wardrobe and get more and more expansive throughout the film. And this is when the kids get the first sort of look at how large the world is and how big their task is. And I really wanted to kind of keep it small for a while so that you could get the impact of it suddenly opening up with these epic landscapes.
Tribute here to John Searle and his band of sculptors
who
created those amazing stone figures in the courtyard.
That courtyard is still one of my favourite sets. I just had such a pronounced image of it as a child, and it really did come through. The other thing that was interesting about that set was the giant Rumblebuffin, which is a well-known character from the book. We actually cast a character, an actor in New Zealand, to play Rumblebuffin, and then they obviously sculpted him as a 12-foot tall giant. And Douglas Gresham, who was C.S. Lewis's stepson, came onto that set on one of his visits, and he was almost in tears, and he was just looking up at Rumblebuffin and saying, "That's exactly what Rumblebuffin should look like." And that was just a huge reassurance, because C.S. Lewis left so much to the imagination, because he left so much undescribed. We had to rely on our own imaginations a lot. And it was really a great reassurance to have somebody who's been reading the book over and over again over a number of years to come and have such a similar impression as the one I had.
By the way, we're looking at Poland now, aren't we?
We are. The real lake is in Poland. Shots like this were shot on a green screen stage in Flock Hill, I think, in Auckland, and then the backgrounds are generated from different photographic elements around Central Europe. And now we're on another set in a freezing warehouse. I don't recommend making films this way. This was an interesting scene in that I never really got as much tension out of the children as I'd hoped, and it was a difficult situation. It was a small green screen stage. There was nothing really pursuing them. It was fairly early on in the shooting process, and again, one of the wonderful things about having CG characters is you can use them to cut to at opportune times, and it allowed me to pick the best moments of the kids from multiple takes, and also add even more tension by putting that fear into the beavers as well. And it's one of the first chances we get to see about how Mr. and Mrs. Beaver really feel about each other.
Right.
This scene coming up, it was a very challenging one early on, because even as a child when I read the book, I remember getting to the bit where we see Father Christmas in the book and flipping back a page and reading again and just kind of going, what is he doing here? And we had a lot of discussion early on about whether he should be in the movie or not. In previous iterations in the animated version of this film that they made in the 70s, he wasn't in the film. And I think it's because he is relatively incongruous. But in doing a bit of research, I really found that C.S. Lewis and Tolkien nearly ended their friendship over this. That C.S. Lewis really strongly felt that Father Christmas belonged here, and Tolkien didn't think he did. And C.S. Lewis stuck with it despite the fact. So I didn't really feel it was up to me to cut it out. I felt it was up to us to find a way to make it work. And I think ultimately it was James Cosmo that made it work, because he's just so sincere and has such gravitas that he really pulls it off as this real kind of wise oracle character.
And I had pointed out that to an American audience, certainly a young American audience, they will not know initially who this man is, because we don't have the concept of Father Christmas. We have a Santa Claus and who has a different costume, a big red suit. And yet, soon enough, you figure out that, of course, it is Santa Claus. Here he is now with a bag full of presents, and you pick it up. So initially, you're not sure who it is. And we've actually had one or two people, when we were testing the film, look at it, and those who hadn't read the book and didn't know who Aslan was, think for a moment that perhaps he's Aslan. And I think it was you, Andrew, who said, I'm not so sure if there is that confusion, if that's a bad thing.
No, I like the idea. I was always worried, because in the book, Aslan is revealed to be a lion fairly early on, and I wanted to give it a bit more impact by making it a surprise. And to me, that means it's successful, that we've got a movie called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but still have people not knowing necessarily that Aslan is a lion, so that he has a lot more impact when he shows up.
No, you don't seem to have a problem making yourself heard.
And this ended up just being such a touching scene and such a sort of a relief moment. You realize that from the moment they get to Narnia, things start going badly for the children. And this is the first moment where they're shown some support. and it's a certain amount of relief here.
I also think that Harry Gregson Williams' cue for this scene, certainly at the beginning, is really, really magical, and it sort of imbues the whole scene with this, as you say, this hope, and sort of lifts temporarily this dark cloud from the children's shoulders. Look how beautifully that sword is designed and finished.
The inscription on the sword is actually from a prophecy in the book. When Aslan bares his teeth, winter meets his death, and when Aslan shakes his mane, we'll have spring again. And it was sort of too much just to get all that wording into the beaver scene, which is what was originally in the book. And at one point I had a moment where Peter actually sat down and read it, but that sort of fell by the wayside. But it's sort of nice to know for those fans that the prophecy exists there inscribed upon the sword. Weta Workshop, who made all those props, I think did a beautiful job. They were all just really very authentic, and each one was personalized for the kids and reflective of Aslan and reflective of the descriptions in the book.
And this is the beginning of a sequence that did not exist in the book, and you really thought it was the time to place something with a certain amount of jeopardy and excitement in the story.
Yeah, the book, the middle part of the book is a lot of running and chasing without a lot of event, and I really wanted a big set piece of some point, of some type in the middle of the film, something to really give it a bit of action and to give real obstacle. And started thinking about what would exist, you know, that would be sympathetic with what was going on during a thaw. At one stage we'd played with the idea of an ice bridge, but that felt like, you know, the bridge breaking had been done, well, I'd done it in Shrek, it had been done many times before. And we came upon this idea of crossing a river as the river was thawing out, and I think this was probably one of your great challenges, Roger, is how to realize that.
Yeah, it was, obviously the set isn't as big as it appears to be here, but creating the frozen waterfall, and then the ice on which the children and the beavers are walking now, it all had to be designed in segments, and the special effects people made each segment respond to weight. So when the children, like here, stood on them, they actually gave way. Very disconcerting and really quite realistic.
Yeah, I think the gimbaling and the ability to spray water up through there also kept the kids on edge. So it sort of added to their performance, because they never knew whether the ground would be stable or not, because we could actually turn the hydraulics on or off. And it just kind of kept them a little bit more on edge, which I think sort of added to the authenticity.
Our mechanical effects people really stepped up to the challenge here.
Yeah. And of course, this is a scene that uses so many different disciplines, from a miniature by New Deal to some CG work by Sony Imageworks on both the animals and the extension of the set. And, you know, in some cases uses CG, real water, miniature, and CG animals all in the same shot.
Kill him now!
Oh, come on. This isn't your war. All my queen wants is for you to take your family and go.
Look, just because some man in a red coat hands you a sword, it doesn't mean...
And there's a sort of an interesting tension to the scene to me, that there's an emotional tension between Peter and Susan particularly. There's the tension between the wolves and the kids, and then there's this tension of the physical surrounding changing around them in a very treacherous way. So it sort of just builds and builds towards a climax. Always had the most fun with Lucy in this moment, with Georgie, because she knew the script so well that she would very often say everyone else's lines, and it was hard to find a take where she wasn't saying, "Hold on to me," as Peter drove the sword in. Now we actually move across to Barrandov in Czech Republic for this big water dump that's happening here. We did all the water tank work actually in the Czech Republic a couple of months after we finished principal photography. And there was about, I think, 12 tons of water, warm water, I'd like to point out, 12 tons of water dumped on the children.
The children loved it. It was like a big swimming pool, and we had no problem getting them jump in and out, and often instead of retiring to a chair or to a camper between setups, they just hang out in the water.
I remember how impressed we were with the colour of the rivers in New Zealand. They have this turquoise colour going through them, which is, I think, tiny little rock particles, volcanic almost, from glaciers. And so we carried it through into the water here. This gives it that really lovely colour.